In addition, please add yourself to my Telegram channel. Telegram is a decentralized platform that I update regularly if I'm doing a video or an interview or any type of broadcast. Also, please add yourself to my channel on Odyssey. Odyssey is essentially the same thing as YouTube. However, it is decentralized and not controlled by the major multimedia companies. And you're going to see a little bit in this video why finding alternative means to communicate is very, very important for us who are trying to do something to change the conditions of our people. So this is one of the ways that I've identified I could try to do as such. So what we're going to talk about today is something that many of you were talking about, if not last week, the week before probably, whenever Facebook shut down, and how that left many people scramble, particularly people inside of the African continent who might be dependent not only on Facebook, but on other means of communication that are also owned by Facebook, so such as WhatsApp or Instagram.
Welcome back. You're still watching Newsline right here on KTN News. Now, social media services Facebook, WhatsApp and Instagram are back up and running after an outage that lasted almost 6 hours yesterday evening. Facebook co-founder Mark Zuckerberg has issued an apology on his Facebook page after the social media outage last night. The global outage also affected Kenyans, mainly business operators who use the 3 social media platforms. Kimani Githuku reports.
Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp and Messenger were unreachable for hours Monday evening. The outage saw over 10.6 million complaints filed worldwide.
Many found themselves cut off from family and friends whom they communicate via the social media platforms, with small business owners who use the platforms for their businesses being affected too.
Facebook's communications department had to use Twitter to calm down the agitated users of Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp. The owner of the platforms, Mark Zuckerberg, had to apologize to millions affected by the outage through his Facebook page.
I couldn't even call through WhatsApp, since rates za WhatsApp ni cheaper, compared to the normal call rates. Na group discussion tulikuwa tunafaa tukue nayo, lakini sasa haikuweza kuhappen because systems ilikuwa chini. Yeah, so jana was really a hectic day.
An outage of this scale for such a long time is rare. A disruption in 2019 left Facebook and its other apps mostly inaccessible across the world for more than 14 hours. Other tech companies, including Twitter, made fun at the social media giant's predicament, prompting responses from the affected apps. The outage is said to have cost Facebook a loss of more than 773 billion Kenyan shillings.
So let's read through this article. It says, WhatsApp and Facebook outage sparks confusion in Africa. Without access to social media, many users felt lost. Their explanations for the technical glitch range from wild conspiracy theories to not so far-fetched concerns that governments could be blocking them from platforms. Facebook announced late on Monday that the root cause of this outage was a faulty configuration change, that there was no evidence that user data was compromised as a result, which we're going to touch on a little bit later. Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg used his account to apologize. He said, "Sorry for the disruption. I know how much you rely on your services to stay connected with the people you care about." Facebook's near total dominance of social media became even more visible on Monday. Website monitoring groups Down Detector said it was the largest such failure ever recorded, with 10.6 million problems that were reported globally. For many Africans, it is not so much about communication, but about much more. Private sector companies use WhatsApp to operate marketing and customer service. An Angolan businessman, for example, said it was not a good feeling, I lost business. That's because people rely on WhatsApp as their primary source of news and even for public services. Now, this is obviously a big problem when you consider the fact that WhatsApp is controlled by one person, and when you consider the fact that Facebook and Instagram are also not controlled by one person. The fact that you have hundreds of billions of people who are in a position where their means of communication, their means of business, their means of buying and selling, their means of providing for their families are literally controlled by one individual. This should have been frightening long before this outage. This should be even more frightening now that we see how much these systems are easy to be no longer at our disposal. Hopefully, after it, we didn't go back to business as usual and just go back to messaging people on WhatsApp and continuing things as if we didn't know what happened. Hopefully, this was a warning to many people that our futures cannot be controlled by one person and thinking that that is something that is in our best interest. Now, I must confess, I did not notice that the outage was happening. I have a Facebook. I'm not on Facebook regularly. I have it specifically for updating people on different platforms that I'm a part of, but I'm not on it day to day. I also have a WhatsApp, but I was just not noticing that there was this outage. And so I did not know until I actually happened to log into Twitter and I found out that there was this outage and a lot of people were outraged. But were people outraged at the correct reason? That's what I want to talk about today, particularly for African people. Was the outrage more so that you lost business, or was the outrage more so that you realized that your entire lives are being controlled by a very small percentage of people? And was your outrage that you weren't able to talk to grandmama and granddad or whatever? Or was your outrage realizing that these people who are not of your community have the ability to completely shut down communication, not just of family members, but of important alliances that we could consider an enemy to these people who control the means of communication? So that's what I'm going to talk about in this video. But before we do, we're going to talk about some news that is happening in the African world. There's a very detailed article that came out this week about NFAC leader Grandmaster Jay and the charges he is facing that could put him in jail for a very long time. Now, this obviously brings up a lot of issues when it comes to the intentional efforts by the government to thwart any type of movements whenever they come out of our communities that can actually inspire mass demonstrations against the power structure, particularly armed mass demonstrations. Of course, I know many of you might not be a fan of Grandmaster Jay, but you have to look at what this represents in the grand scheme of things when it comes to Africans arming themselves and Africans standing as a direct threat to white supremacist groups instead as a abstract threat, instead of people just tweeting on Facebook, hey, I'm not my grandparents, I'll do this to you. These were actual people who in an organized fashion armed themselves and said, we will do this to you. Very different than what we're used to. So the article came out and it's in the description. You should read the whole thing. But Grandmaster Jay is saying that you put me back in the cave. It was a methodology used to silence a very powerful voice in the world. Though his organization had marched peacefully and respectfully, he said most white groups have intimidated protesters and barged into government buildings carrying weapons with little interference from police. Now, another thing that we should keep in mind, and this goes right to the theme of this particular video, is that social media accounts completely shut him down whenever he was charged and indicted with pointing a gun at a federal agent who was on a building and didn't shoot him, but saw someone pointing a gun at him but didn't shoot. He was shut down by social media for being charged for something. That's very unordinary. And this brings to question, are these social media platforms as non-biased? Are they people standing beside and just looking out for the good of community? Or are they direct collaborators with the government? This is another thing that has implications for all of us. So many of you are aware of the ongoing conflict inside of Ethiopia with Tigray, and also this involves Eritrea. The United States government has put out a message signaling that they are ready and willing to do whatever they need to do in order to get the upper hand inside of this area. Now, it says the United States is considering a full range of tools at its disposal, including use of economic sanctions to respond to, it says, the worsening of the crisis. This is what's being reported. Ethiopia's national army launched a ground offensive against the region of Tigray on Monday, it is reported by Reuters. Now, this is coming obviously right after the Ethiopian president, Abiy Ahmed, had put out a number of UN representatives and has been boldly saying to Western actors that you basically have no right to interfere into our region. You have no right to tell us that we cannot defend ourselves. And among this message being put out, the United States has basically positioned itself to say, you're not going to be the one to put us in our place, we'll put you in your place. Typical imperialist tactics, and we should also understand that the news organizations are playing the role of creating the narrative in support of the U.S. intervention inside of an African region. I hope, regardless of where you stand, regardless of your politics, that we are universally against an intervention inside of the African continent by an imperialist who has never, ever once in history had the good of African people in its heart, in its plans. It's always had the dominance of American Western interest inside of the African continent as being the real reason for any action done by this government. So therefore, regardless of what you think you know or what you may know, let's all collectively have a stand against any type of intervention by this government or any Western government into this conflict, and always hope for a peaceful resolution that is being controlled by Africans and being solved by Africans. And last but not least, in Barbados, there has been moves to finally move Queen Elizabeth from the being the head of the country. It says Barbados has announced its intention to remove Queen Elizabeth from its head of state and become its own republic. The time has come to fully leave our colonial past behind. Good for you, Barbados. It aims to complete the process in time for the 55th anniversary of independence from Britain in November of 2021. Choice in itself brings up other questions, because if they're not able to do it on their actual Independence Day, do they have to have another Independence Day? One day signaling the symbolic independence of Barbados while it was still controlled by Britain, and another Independence Day signaling the actual separation of Barbados from British power. That's a question. But this is something obviously that is positive. And by the way, we'll be discussing it more this Saturday, 10 a.m. Eastern time on the WCC podcast and book club. Previously, we were only streaming to WCC's channel, but we'll also be streaming to this channel. So hopefully everyone will tune in and get some more in-depth analysis on this story. But it's definitely a good signal that African people are becoming awakened to the fact that symbolic decolonization is not decolonization. We need actual sovereignty. We need actual control. And you can't have that, having a head of state, a colonial head of state, who makes decisions about your country even while they pretend that you're independent. Okay, so let's get to today's subject. Digital colonialism. That is what African people are facing all over the world. And this term might seem foreign to some of us. Digital colonialism and the concept might seem asinine, because many of us have been constrained to the textbook version or the textbook definitions of colonialism. The textbook saying that colonialism is when you have a colonist host country colonizing a territory, having a legally binding relationship, and exporting resources of the colony for their betterment, while also determining the internal politics of the colony. This is what we tend to think of as the only way that you are a colonized people. Well, let's think about some of the other things that are related to colonialism. It's not just a matter of a legally binding relationship. It's really about control. It's really about dominance. It's about you being in a position of determining the future and the projections of a people's future, whether it's indirectly or directly. And even under the formal definitions of colonialism, if we're even talking about the exploitation of resources, we should learn that data is a resource that is being exploited from African people. This has all of the symbols, all of the signs, all of the indicators of colonialism, even though it's wrapped inside of a forward-thinking model that tells us that we're moving into the digital age, we're moving into the future. Now, I wanted to do this video, even though I've talked about things like this, I wanted to do this video directly because I feel like we have to be very explicit in understanding our relationship to these technological platforms. And we also have to be very much of the mindset that we not only are on these platforms just to achieve a certain purpose, that we're very much knowing every single time that we're on them, every time that we log in, that we're being put inside of an experiment as lab rats. And it's just having that power of knowledge, I think, will determine a lot of their behaviors and how we actually interact with these major platforms. So let's go into this first article. All articles are always in the description. It says, Facebook's digital colonialism made Monday's outage a crisis for the world. The Facebook outage that struck Monday and lasted through the day was ultimately a minor inconvenience for most Americans. I myself, who identify as an African, but I am in America, have said that I didn't even notice that it happened. But countries like Brazil, it caused a destabilizing and disorienting 7 hours, not because Facebook.com was gone, but because WhatsApp, the messaging service, the company also owned by Facebook, suddenly went offline along with it. Still largely an afterthought in the United States, WhatsApp has grown into one of the world's most vital communication services. More than 2 billion people, 1 in 4 on the planet, 1 in 4 people on the planet are on WhatsApp. WhatsApp's texting and messaging, internet-based video and audio chat platforms are especially popular in the global South, where WhatsApp is a cheap way to avoid often exorbitant cost of SMS messaging and cellular data. Nearly half of all Brazilians, for example, said that it's their most used app. More than 90% of the country's internet users are WhatsAppers. And this is also the case for Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, Argentina, Malaysia, and Colombia. The ubiquity of has essentially turned WhatsApp into a public utility. It's so crucial to global communication infrastructure that when it goes down, entire countries, segments of their economies, and even some basic daily governmental activities nearly grind to a halt. But unlike actual public utilities, WhatsApp is privately owned enterprise subject to virtually none of the regulatory scrutiny that governs many services. And across the global South, a US-based company has amassed near monopolistic power over people's basic ability to communicate without any real accountability to the countries or citizens who rely on it most heavily. Do you understand now why we're calling this digital colonialism? You have one company, Facebook, okay, which owns WhatsApp and Instagram, who is owned by one person, Mark Zuckerberg. He's the one that makes the calls, and whatever he decides affects all of these people. They said 1 in 4 people around the world, many of whom are in Africa. Most of the people who I know of who are continental Africans have WhatsApp. Now more and more it's even growing, because if you want to communicate as an organizer in the US, have Pan-Africanist movement and communicate with other people, you're probably going to use that as a form that is most convenient for the most amount of people. But we should also understand that even while they said WhatsApp is, very cheap, you can avoid the crazy costs that are associated with SMS text messaging. We know that these cheap items do not come with a price. Anytime that they're trying to make a convenience for us, I want to emphasize that anytime that things are made convenient for us. Oh, it's easy. We can just log in and do this. Oh, Google, just look up whatever you want. It's very easy. All of these easy means of communications come with a price, because clearly if you are someone who is in control, someone who is control of the monopoly, you would want to make your money, whether you make it on the front end or the back end. And these people make their money on the back end. So don't think that the convenience and the ease of technology means that we're in a better place as a people. No, actually, it means that they figured out a better way to monetize us as a people, us as a commodity. And that's literally what has happened with WhatsApp, Facebook, and many other social media applications. Don't make this just about these companies. This video is focused on them, but it applies to a wide variation of different companies who are also engaged in similar activities. So as I said, I barely go into Facebook, but only reason I do go in is to post things to platforms that I know some of my people are on. And I did recognize when I was in Ghana and I tried to log into Facebook that Facebook looked very different. And I never knew why. Well, this is the reason why. It says, not so long after purchasing WhatsApp, Facebook launched a program called Free Basics, meant to lower barriers to internet across the world. The basis of Free Basics was access to a limited number of baritones, low data websites without the cost of typical data fees, a practice known as zero rating. The stated premise was to help expand internet access across the continent. Free Basics eventually spread to roughly 65 countries, including 30 in Africa, but it also wound up mired in controversy, especially in India, where government regulators and net neutrality advocates immediately feared that the company was simply trying to get a monopoly on the internet market to boost its own profits. Facebook, they worried, was trying to ingrain in people's minds that it was the internet, especially in the global south. Later studies conducted by digital advocacy groups would conclude that that is exactly what Facebook has done and accuse the company of engaging in digital colonialism. This is called data colonialism, said one expert. They provide access so that they can extract as much data as possible, especially in middle markets where they don't have that access. Now, this creates so many issues for us as a people when you realize, first of all, there is this automatic de facto thought that the main people who control the internet is the only means of communication. There's not even a lot of work to try to create alternative means as a people, not even a broad connecting with different people in the global south of means of communication that we all control something. No, this is kind of the de facto internet. And that's a lot of power for one person to have, I'm sure you all know. But as is alluded also in the article, the issue of data, that becomes a big issue for us as a people as we're trying to move. Even if you're not someone who's necessarily like an organizer, and I hope, all of us are in organizations. If not, you should be. But if you're not, this also has big implications for you. Because essentially everything about you is out there, and everything about you is out there to be sold and to be given to people to decide that they want to find ways to manipulate you on the internet. Another article says it's not a coincidence. For years, Facebook has been working to expand internet access in developing countries because that would also increase its own user base. To do this, the company has researched the use of satellites, drones, wireless radio networks. It has partnered with local telecommunications companies to improve the physical internet infrastructure. In 2013, Facebook launched the Internet.org initiative, which allowed users to visit Facebook with certain other websites without data fees. This was part of Mark Zuckerberg's grand plan to bring the then 85% of the world who had access to cellular data online via free internet access. And remember what I said before, nothing is given to us for free. Nothing is given to us by these people for free. Nothing is given to us to make things easier just for no reason. Everything is calculated. And then very important, in 2018, Facebook announced the Internet.org, which was Free Basics, had brought 100 million people online. In 2019, Free Basics was available in 65 countries, including, as we said, about 30 in Africa. Now, this is important when you think about the timing, 2018, 2019. If you are based in the United States, you very much well know that Facebook is not the primary means of communication inside of this country at this particular time, despite the fact that it is an American company. Many people have either deleted their Facebooks or don't go on their Facebook pages. Many people have deactivated. Some people just have them lingering out there. I would encourage you, if your Facebook's lingering out there, to deactivate, delete it, because it's very well known that there are people who are hackers. But many people don't use Facebook all like that. There are other means of communications that are now the big focus. Despite that, I'm going to put a graph on the screen right now. As you see, despite the fact that they have lost their hold on users inside of the United States, their numbers have gone up as far as the income inside that Facebook is making. Think about that. How is that possible when people are not even going to Facebook all like that in the United States? That's because Facebook's market is no longer America. Facebook's market is the global South. The global South is what is going to make Mark Zuckerberg possibly the next Bezos or the next Elon Musk, one of the top richest people. And he recognizes that. So this is intentional. He's intentionally going into a certain market because he wants control. And clearly America's not going to give him that control. So as colonists do, they find a better market for their particular purpose. And this is what has happened with Facebook. Now, this becomes an issue not just because of the unilateral control of one person over our communications. This also becomes an issue because of the data issue. I've talked about it several times in this video, but let's just go more into it, because I will admit myself, whenever people would say, hey, you know, they're accessing your data, they're selling your data, oh, your data is, you know, being manipulated by these companies, I didn't really care, because my thing was always, well, if I see an ad, I'll just ignore the ad. Or if I see, you know, something that, okay, so what, I search something and it comes up, hey, it might even be convenient because you might bring me something that I wasn't able to find on my own. I didn't care too much a while back. Now I care a lot, because I understand that this is all going to reach a head at a certain point whenever we're trying to struggle for freedom and liberation, because your data is you. Your data, as far as the digital space, is who you are. And if who you are is able to be bought, sold, and accessed by these big multi-billion-dollar companies, understand that that's only going to be used against the liberation struggle. Now, if you did not know, during this outage, and they're saying it's not related, I don't agree with it, but this is what they're saying, there was also a data breach. Now, this did not receive nearly as much internet cover or media coverage as it should have. In fact, I'll even note that when I was looking up articles that actually talked about the data breach, the vast majority of the ones that are reporting it are reputable, but there are actually smaller websites that are reporting it. The only big one that I saw reporting it was the New York Times, and even inside of the title of the article, they said essentially, this data breach, there's no proof that it was actually that it actually was linked to the outage, or there's no proof that it happened. So it's clearly an agenda. You know, the big people who are in control, they don't want to make this any bigger than what it seems. And then the smaller people who do have access to put information out are basically saying, hey, y'all, this really happened. Now, personally identifiable information, that's PII, of over 1.5 billion Facebook users is reportedly being sold on a popular underground forum, according to cybersecurity and privacy watchdogs. The data, which has reportedly been collected through web scrapping, includes names, emails, phone numbers, location, gender, and user IDs, calling it one of the biggest data dumps from the popular social network. The founder of Privacy Affairs, who shared the news with the underground cell, claims that PII the breach appears to be authentic. It appears that the seller who's selling all this information could be our information. This person is doing it in a piecemeal fashion, since one prospective buyer claimed that the seller is asking for $5,000 for the data of 1 million accounts, making the complete record worth $5 million. So it's very clear, even if it's not important to us, it's important to other people. They're willing to pay good money for it. Now, you know, is $5 million that big if you think about the whole like internet and everything? Maybe not, but it's still very significant if you think about the people whose data they're accessing. Ask any of those people how much they think their data is worth. They probably think it's worth nothing, but these people are willing to pay money in order to get access to personal information about you. Doesn't that creep you out? Because it should creep you out. It creeps me out. People are willing to pay all this money to get your email address, to get your location, to get your name, to get your identity, your facial identity. People are willing to pay a lot of money to get access to these things. Now, let's talk more about data. It says Facebook is another article. Facebook and other companies may be very well protecting your privacy. As you all know, you might log into Facebook and you'll see all these privacy controls that weren't there before. But they don't need to protect your personal information to determine exactly who you are and what you'll do next. At the moment, the data is most immediately valuable as a way of targeting advertising. Without having to attach your name or address to your data profile, a company can nonetheless compare you to other people who have exhibited similar characteristics online as far as their behavior, the clicking, the liking. Every time you like something, every time you like something. And don't think I'm like out here preaching to y'all. I'm preaching to myself too, as a way to say we need to get our stuff together. Every time we like something, they're watching. In a statement made to NBC, Facebook said it targets advertising categories based on people's interests as gauged by their activity on Facebook. And the company points out that users can dissociate themselves from an interest by removing it from their settings. The company also says that one's ads interests are not tied to personal characteristics, only to their interests, and that Facebook's ads policy prohibits discrimination. But this sort of data is so powerful that it produces results far more powerful than traditional advertising. For instance, Facebook offers the chance to pay not just for a certain audience size, but an actual business outcome, like a sell, an app download, or a newsletter subscription. Once upon a time, advertisers paid a CPM, cost per 1,000 views, for a marketing campaign. This was just the chance to get in front of people, but now Facebook offers a rate based on CPA, or cost per action, a once unimaginable metric offered because the company is so confident that it is understanding of people and their preference that Facebook can easily guarantee a certain number of people will do certain things. Now, if you're like me, CPM, CPA, whatever, I don't care. Like, give me the gist. Okay, the gist is that they study us. They know our behavior. It's not so much just knowing about us. It's knowing what we'll do. Understand how crazy that is, but how big the implications are. They study you so closely. They study what you like. They study what you look at. They can see how long you spent on something being on your screen. They study it so well that they don't need to necessarily sell people who you are. They can sell people, this is what you will do. This is what tyranny will do on this day. This is what John will do. This is what Umar will do. This is what all of our people will do. This is very, very, very serious. And I hope that you all are understanding that these types of analyses of our people are not just being done in relation to advertising, but it's also being done in relation to suppression of us collectively. And the data can do much more than that. As we've seen in the past few years, data can predict not just which shirt you might be willing to buy, but which topics are so emotionally charged that you cannot look away from them. I want to hit on this later too. And which pieces of propaganda will work best upon you. And what makes the platform that collect data at scale an amazing way to influence human beings. Maybe not you, maybe not today, but it's enough influence at scale over time that the outcomes on the whole are both overwhelming, consistent, and yet individually invisible, which makes it even crazier. It says in the future, the handing away of anonymous data to companies is going to give them so much insight into human behavior that the systems built on that data may sweep all of us up without our conscious participation in the process. And that is not in the future, that's today. That is right now. Now, this is the last article I'm going to read from, because this kind of goes back to, like I said, organizers, our people were hopefully organizing to get into a better position, to get out of this position. It says communities are at risk, how encroaching surveillance is putting a squeeze on activists. Now, when you make a decision to attend a protest, that comes with consequences that you might not be aware of. This is because policing and security services, always hungry in their quest to obtain more data about us, are using advanced and invasive techniques to learn more about our lives. A whole range of technologies, including facial recognition, can be used to spy on protesters. They are targeting us in places we wouldn't normally expect to be: our social media, our habits, our interactions. Now, companies and governments monitor and collect everything from content we share to the messages we send to the people we're connected to. A massive amount of data can be analyzed to generate profiles, make predictions about users, and to populate databases and watch lists. When you pair this growing surveillance of our lives with the already considerable offline surveillance that we face on a daily basis, the effects of our privacy and freedom is chilling. And I will say particularly, this is very chilling. Because if you're thinking logically, how are we going to get out of this position? And you think about the fact that so many times our ancestors have risen up in the past to do the same thing. These people didn't have all this watching. They didn't have all these analyses. They didn't have all this data that they were given to these companies. You know, Thomas Sankara, he didn't have this problem. The Black Panther Party, they didn't have this problem. Kwame Nkrumah, they didn't have this problem. They had surveillance like in a physical form, right? This is surveillance that goes far beyond what any of our successful movements in the past have had to deal with. And if we're not thinking of this actively, then understand we're never going to be able to unseat our oppressors, because they're using something far more advanced than what has been done in a successful movement. To date, the most successful movement in the United States among Africans was the UNIA. They got Marcus Garvey out of here with infiltration. They got him out of here with some lies and making up, manipulating stories and concoctions. That's how they got him out of here, right? They didn't have the data on what Marcus Garvey likes, what he's into, what he wants to buy today. They didn't have the data on what he thinks about this person's ideas. And, you know, they didn't have him putting out on Twitter, oh, I think this is good, I think this is bad. They didn't have this plethora of information that they have today. They didn't have these things. So if we're thinking seriously, how are we going to get out of this system? Well, guess what? There's a whole nother set of circumstances that exist for us that didn't exist for our ancestors. And that means that the impetus is on us, that we cannot take these things for granted. We have to actively have this a part of the conversation. So many of us focus on COINTELPRO, but we're not focusing on how COINTELPRO has been repackaged, rebranded, and made to a whole new, better model. These are serious things that we have to think about if we're serious about our liberation. If you're not serious about your liberation, don't take my words, you know, don't listen to me. Continue doing what you want to do. Continue putting everything out on the internet. Continue doing all of that. This is for people who are serious about our liberation. We have to take these things very serious. Now, predictive policing programs are using data from social media, which we should know, right? Networks to identify future criminals. Political institutions are monitoring social media to understand and control public moods. In some cases, social media data is even being used to make key decisions about an individual, such as if they are creditworthy. The surveillance of our lives has become more widespread. This has serious consequences for the way we live, both online and offline, and our interactions are swept up and analyzed by governments, law enforcement, and companies. So I always try to say, oh, this is what we should do or we shouldn't do. As I said, I'm preaching to me while I'm preaching to y'all. And seriously, you know, there are things that I think that every single one of us should just have in mind about what we're going to do differently. But realistically, even if I knew what we should do, who's to say I should say it on this exact platform? Because realistically speaking, and I don't necessarily have a clear answer, but if I did, that would be accessible. That would be able to be studied. That would be able to be dissected and predictive as far as, you know, okay, well, how do we get around their movement or how they're responding to this issue? This is the world we live in. So instead of saying what I think we should do, I'm going to just bring up some things that some of which I've already mentioned in this video that we might want to consider, because these are things that they're accessing, that they're collecting about us as we speak. When you click on meaningless content on the internet, okay, guilty of this, right? Let's say, oh, Nicki Minaj said something about vaccines. Oh, click what she said about vaccines. Oh, so-and-so broke up. Oh my gosh, this couple has been together for so long. I wonder why they broke up. Click these things, believe it or not, but this is something that's very valuable to people who are trying to control your liberation. I'll tell you why. Because I happen to notice that Twitter has become more and more barbaric as far as targeting us with distraction. Distraction is a very powerful tool in the hands of your enemy. While you should be thinking about, what can I do, you know, for my people today? What can we do collectively? How can we organize? You know, what organizations can I join in my community? You know, what time is the meeting starting? Some of us will unknowingly click a story, and that story will have us going in loops for an hour. And I've been guilty of this. I know my friends have been, I know my family has been, so I know that this is true. Some of us will follow, oh, that's not what happened with Dave Chappelle. We'll go through all this stuff. Oh crap, so-and-so said this. Oh, let me type up a response. Not knowing that this distraction created a very well-used tool in the hands of the enemy. So what do you think next time is going to happen that you want to be productive and do something for the people? Oh, let's just put a story, you know, put this in their feed. Let's put this, you know, on their homepage. So you log in and say, okay, you know, I'm going to write my, my breakdown of how we unseat white supremacist capitalism. But then you see, oh, snap, this certain celebrity who I've always followed, something happens with them and you click on it. That's something that we do that we have to think about going forward. When you spend crazy amounts of time arguing with others via the internet, I used to be guilty of this, and I've stopped intentionally because, one, I have of the feeling if you argue with people on the internet, they're not looking to have their mind changed. I mean, that's just the reality. Like, not even 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, if someone is arguing on the internet, even if they're wrong, they're not going to admit, hey, I'm wrong, because they feel like they have an audience. But even besides that, understand that people are watching while you're doing this argument. So one, it's a distraction, obviously, because you're not changing anyone's mind. You're not changing your mind. You might get some likes, maybe by some off chance you might give someone some information while you're arguing with this person. But overwhelmingly, it can become a waste of time. But then on the other side of it, you should also understand you're putting on full display your philosophies, your opinions, and what you think. How you'll dissect that person's thoughts. This is all data that is being accessed. That's something to know that they're using. You should also know that they're using when you innocently search Google terms. Hey, just the other day, I wanted to kill this crazy weed that is insane. How do I kill this weed? That's something innocent, right? But let's think about more bigger things. How do I deal with this? How do I deal with this person who's doing this to me, who's following me? How do I deal with having the security? These are things that we type innocently, and it's not to say that you don't need to search terms and not search things, but it means that you need to know that even when you're not thinking about what you're searching. So you could search something like how to unseat white supremacy. They're watching while you search every single little thing. So that's another thing to know that they are using against you is your innocent Google or Yahoo or whatever search term. When you connect with activists on social media, we should know this. And again, these are not things saying that we shouldn't do. These are things saying that we know that they're watching. They're watching your communications. They're watching, okay, well, I'm connecting with this person. Oh, what do you think about this person? Are you going to join this person? Or what movements are you going to do with this person? They're watching those interactions. When you take notes on Google Drive, this is something that I had to think about when I was thinking through what do I do on the internet? What do a lot of people do on the internet that we probably shouldn't be doing? Doing something like mapping out, your organizational plans on Google Drive. That's something that you might want to reconsider, and it's something that I myself am going to work to no longer do. When you join Facebook groups and other radical groups or things for radical purpose, so you join a group, armed Black men against the white supremacist structure. They have that in their information. The CIA has that in their information now. It's not just the companies. They're selling this. They're giving this to the people who want it the most. They're tracking you that way. Also, I want to say, consider just things that you put on the internet. I've seen some people tweet some things that it's like, why would you put that out there? And you might feel like you're being bold, but understand writing something out, that might incite, or say people might say that you're inciting some type of violence or something like that. That's not a good thing. That I will say you should not do. Be very thoughtful about any type of messages that you put on the internet. Thinking about things that they're using, our physical locations, where we say where we're going to be at what time. There's people who are not in the government who use our physical locations. I remember when the rapper XXXTentacion was killed. He was just Instagram living, saying, hey, I'm, buying, I got a bag of money or something like that. I'm buying an expensive car. People found his location, went to where he was, and unfortunately murdered him. How much do you think that that's also not being done inside of real time, many times with our people? Our locations are something that they use against us. And what I'm doing right now is something that they use against us. Putting messages out to the people. Be intentional when you're putting messages out to the people. This is something I've learned over time. Not saying that there's any safe way to put information out, but I think there are certain things that you don't need to say publicly. There's certain things that you don't need to put out there publicly. There's certain things that will, could help some people, but in the larger sense, will it help a lot of people? Maybe not now. Maybe the timing is coming and the timing is not now. These are things to also think about. So the takeaway is everything's a balancing act whenever you're talking about liberation. Everything's a balancing act, and you have to be balanced. And I think, if anything, the takeaway from this video is going to be that I hope we're very intentional with every single thing that we do on the internet. This is a call to everyone, myself included, that we be very intentional about every single thing we do on the internet. We have to be intentional about what we say. We have to be intentional about what we write and be intentional about what you click. If you don't need to know what's going on with P. Diddy, you see him trending, let him trend. You know, if you don't need to know what's happening with the Kardashians, why click it? You know, this is something that it's a challenge. And I understand that there's been whole studies on this. This is like an addiction type thing for some people. Literally, you know, they say when you're on the internet, you're, you know, getting likes and everything, and you're clicking certain things, like it's something lights up in our brain. These people have figured us out. They have made it hard for us to walk past. So this is not a condemnation, you know, to us and saying, oh, you care about celebrities. Like, I think many of us who, you know, make that criticism don't admit that we probably do the same thing in other ways, because it's been so programmed into this culture. It's been so programmed into the oligarchy that this is our way of, you know, trying to get people to stop caring about their own collective circumstances and start focusing on these individuals. This is something that's well embedded into our culture. So don't necessarily condemn people, you know, offhand. Understand that this is something that they're doing to manipulate us, you know. So it's not just the, oh, you're stupid for searching this person. No, you're being sought after. This is like you're a fish and they're throwing, there's this bait that they're throwing. All of these things is bait. So if we're understanding that they're throwing us bait, that gives us the question, what do we want to do? You know, how do we find ways to get around that? How do we find ways to not take the bait? This is always going to be a question for us. So again, at minimum, be intentional on the internet. Don't feel like it's your internet. Feel like this is literally, I'm logging into the oppressor's means of communication today. That's what we have to do. And from there, I believe many of us some of us who may have already been having conversations on or off the internet about what we should do. And going forward, some of us who are going to think more about it and try to come up with concrete plans. You know, these are the things that we need to be doing while we're also being intentional. So I hope this video was helpful. It was honestly, like I said, preaching to yourself while you're also preaching to others. So it's helpful for me also. And I just hope that this drives more conversation about this. This is a really real issue. And I unfortunately, because of the comfort and the ease of the internet, it can so easily be taken for granted. So this is a call for all of us. Don't take this for granted. Treat this like this is right now, because even if it's unconscious and you don't know what is happening, this thing is happening right now. So that's all I have for this video. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Hey family, this is Tierney Cherie. I'm here to make an announcement that I'm very, very excited to make. I'm excited because I really think this is something that is important for our people. Otherwise, I would not have devoted so much time and energy towards it. So I finished my first book, and the book title is Fostering False Identity, the Child Welfare System's Design of Social Control of the Black Family. Now, why is this book something that I think will be very important for our community? Well, number one, it's dealing with the system of white supremacy, particularly the way that the system has targeted our children. If you don't know, our children are literally our future. Without our children, we have no future. And so understand that the system is very crafty when figuring out what to derail first. And to me, it's no mistake that the system particularly went after the Black family. If you look at what happened whenever we were enslaved by this system, and continues to go after the Black family, continues to go after Black children, continues to try to villainize African parents. So for that, I wanted to particularly talk about this subject. Now, the other thing that the book will deal with is our African identities. Why is it that our African identities are a threat to this system? Why is it that whenever we want to identify ourselves as being African, we get so much drawback inside of the Black community? I think a lot of us are not aware of the history of assimilationist thought inside of our community, this idea that we have to be close to white in order to be accepted. And so that's another subject that we delve into in this book. So I'm hoping that anyone who is, obviously, if you're a parent, a Black parent and you really want to understand why it is that these systems are going after your children, I encourage you to read this book. I hope that it will arm you with a lot of knowledge and a lot of foresight, not just about how to protect your own children, but how to organize in your community, because that's really the purpose of the book, is to say that we have to organize among ourselves in order to protect ourselves from this white supremacist system. And then obviously, if you're an organizer in general, this is something that I think is important for you to read, because like I said, this is a subject in the Black community that we just don't discuss enough. Child welfare is not something that is going to get enough attention. People, obviously, we organize them around other causes, but this is one that is really important that I feel like we have to pay more attention to.